Raise your hands, Marcelo.
Okay. All right. Welcome everyone, brothers and sisters, directors, ACTRAV colleagues, and Decent Work team members. And I'm very pleased to welcome you, and I'm very happy that you are able to make it. You were able to make it to this webinar. And this is the webinar Strengthening Workers' Organizations' Capacity in Building Back Better, Advancing Social Dialogue for Solution. And this is the last session of the webinar 2.0 series. And we wanted to end this particular series on a high note and to share with you some of the vibrant initiatives on social dialogue that we are experiencing in our Caribbean region. But I don't wish to take your time. I will go over the program. And today we have a very important participation from all of you, and we will have the opening remarks by our ILO Director for the Caribbean, Mr. Denis Sulu. Then we will have our Director of ACTRAV ILO opening remarks, Ms. Maria Elena Andre. And after they have their opening remarks, we will move into the first presentation. We would have the global trends on the use of social dialogue during the COVID-19 pandemic. This will be done by my colleague, Ms. Melanie Jinroyd from ACTRAV ILO. After her presentation, we will move into another section, which we will showcase 3 different initiatives that we are having in the Caribbean. The first one will be from our sister, Ms. Shirley Price, who is the president of the Jamaica Household Workers Union. And then we will have an ongoing and bipartite initiative on social dialogue. This is between workers and employers in Trinidad and Tobago. My dear brother, Michael Anisette, will be able to share that experience. Who's from the NATUC Union in Trinidad and Tobago. And then we will have a regional point of view, and we will highlight the different regional social dialogue initiatives that there are in place at the moment. And this will be done by our dear brother, Andre Louis, and who's the president of the Caribbean Congress of Labour. And after their participations as panelists, we would have a section of questions and answers and comments. And this is the section where I was highlighting before that you can make use of the Q&A box or the chat for us to address these questions to the panelists. And if we need to expand, then the team will be able to help and also have an opinion. After that, we will have the closing remarks by our TRAV ILO director, Ms. Marilena Andre. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you our Director for the Caribbean, Mr. Denis Sulu. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcelo. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending where you are in the world. This is what happens these days, all different time zones. Let me thank you, first of all, for finding time. And I wish to acknowledge your presence here today, distinguished brothers and sisters. Some of you I've spoken to recently, as I introduced myself, having taken on the position of director several months ago. So let me also acknowledge the presence of our dear director, responsible for ACTRAV, Maria Elena, and other colleagues who are present from ACTRAV, could be headquarters in the regional office, and also Marcelo in our office in the Caribbean. Let me also acknowledge the presence of other ILO colleagues who might be attending this webinar virtually. So let me thank you all again for affording me this opportunity to say a few words at the opening of this very important webinar on behalf of our ILO Decent Work team and Office for the Caribbean. As the world of work continues to be impacted by the global COVID-19 pandemic, the ILO and its constituents, governments, workers' organizations, and employers' organizations have been playing a crucial role in designing and implementing measures that would enable them to alleviate the effects of the current pandemic on the people and their families. Indeed, the assessments that the ILO has carried out on the impact of COVID-19 on the global world of work indicates clearly that the effects will be far-reaching, pushing millions of people into unemployment, underemployment, and working poverty. In the CARICOM region, governments have introduced several measures to coordinate the immediate response to COVID-19, with workers' organizations and employers' organizations taking part in negotiations and implementing several initiatives which have developed into programs aimed at mitigating the impact of COVID. The ILO in this regard continues to support its constituents by providing tools and mechanisms that facilitate discussions on policy arguments or agreements rather, aiming at helping governments, employers and workers to find common ground to advance their solutions to the current crisis. Some of you may be well aware that the ILO's produced a policy framework to work as a blueprint to tackle the economic and social impact of COVID-19, which comprises of 4 key pillars. The first pillar in the blueprint is stimulating economic and employment. Secondly, is supporting enterprises, jobs, and incomes. The third pillar talks about protecting workers in the workplace. And last but not the least, the fourth pillar talks about relying on social dialogue and social dialogue for solutions. As regards to the latter, the ILO considered it very important to first strengthen the capacity and resilience of employers and workers organizations. Secondly, strengthen the capacities of governments. And thirdly, to strengthen social dialogue, collective bargaining, and labor relations institutions and processes. Now let's look a bit closer at strengthening the capacity and resilience of employers and workers organizations. Employer and business membership organizations, and in this case I might focus strictly on employers across the world, are actively responding to the COVID-19 crisis. In particular, they're supporting government action to protect public health and formulating business needs in respect of government measures aimed at mitigating the economic and social impact of the crisis. They're drawing up evidence-based policy recommendations to enable economic and social recovery and are supporting building back better approaches to the recovery process. Additionally, the employer-based members organizations are engaging in tripartite and bipartite dialogue on policies linked to the crisis mitigation and promoting recovery. They're deepening collaboration with workers' organizations and demonstrating in practice the value of social partnerships by collectively providing quick and innovating solutions. It's therefore important that employers-based members organizations have the necessary skills and tools to reach out to members, particularly access members' needs and challenges they face, analyze the business environment, and propose policy solutions. Now, coming to workers' organizations, to which some of you come from and which is of particular significance in this webinar, we see that in many countries, workers' organizations have been at the forefront of the response to some of the challenges brought about by the crisis. For example, workers' organizations have been proactively developing policy proposals for government's actions on social protection and employment retention schemes to be discussed in the framework of social dialogue institutions. Workers' organizations have also successfully influenced and or supported national policies to protect lives, jobs, incomes, particularly in relation to wage and income support for freelancers, the self-employed, and gig workers. They've also been at the forefront for advocating loan relief for rent or mortgage payments, the provision of free health, and other such incentives that workers are due. Workers' organizations, as you may be aware, have also been negotiating measures to mitigate the immediate negative socioeconomic impact of the crisis on the workers themselves. These include occupational health and safety measures, and these measures related to working time, including teleworking arrangements and paid leave. And indeed, in some of the discussions that I've had with some of you, you've highlighted the importance of these measures to ensuring that workers go back to a safe working place, but also that workers' difficulties brought about COVID are alleviated by providing alternative income measures. Such negotiations have also carried out inter alia through collective bargaining agreements and bilateral agreements at various levels. Now, of course, you cannot just work with employers and workers together. As you know, the ILO being a tripartite organization, it's very important to include government. And what is the responsibility of government? As we all know, the responsibility of government is creating an enabling environment for sound labor relations. The ILO considers that the state plays a critical role in providing the necessary environment for social dialogue by establishing legal and institutional frameworks based on international labor standards, providing services that enable all parties to engage in effective social dialogue, and promoting and realizing the enabling rights of freedom of association and effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining. Addressing the social and economic impact of the pandemic in an effective way requires strong labor administration. It is therefore important that governments equip the institutions responsible for labor administration and other relevant state agencies with the relevant institutional and knowledge capacities so that they can fulfill their policy functions. Given the downward pressure on wages and increase in terminations of employment as a result of the crisis, the number of individual and collective disputes is expected to increase. Government should ensure that institutions dealing with the prevention and resolution of labor disputes have adequate resources so that despite an increase in caseload, they can resolve disputes promptly and provide all workers with access to justice. The ILO in the Caribbean has been supporting constituents and workers' organizations in particular in advancing social dialogue activities, providing workers' organizations with safe spaces to dialogue so that they're able to discuss, reach mutual agreements, and develop joint plans of actions that will in turn help workers and their families. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, there's been a remarkable good practice on social dialogue. In this case, both employers and workers' organizations are engaged in bipartite discussion sessions with the aim of advancing a joint plan of action to support workers and businesses during the current pandemic. Employers and workers' organizations have a key part to play in the design and implementation of public support measures for the sectors that are mostly affected by the pandemic, including the hospitality sector, which, as you know, in the Caribbean is one of the largest sectors, shipping, civil aviation, and the retail and trade sectors. This can ensure that measures to protect the livelihoods of workers and enterprises are implemented effectively and are targeted at those most in need. Distinguished participants, brothers and sisters, while governments have responsibility for the design and implementation of public policies, the social partners can make a decisive contribution to shaping these policies. And this is why it's important that we're having this webinar today, because social partners' responsibility is to ensure that they complement and support the tripartite and direct government action through their own active participation in this program. Indeed, bipartite and tripartite social dialogue can help to devise longer-term policies and strategies for the post-crisis with a view to boosting productivity, economic growth, promoting transitions to formality, and ensuring social cohesion. Let me end my remarks, brothers and sisters, by thanking you all for finding time to attend this very important webinar, and I would encourage you to actively participate, because ultimately going forward, it's your inputs that will make a difference as we strive to overcome this very difficult time brought to us by COVID-19. I thank you much and I wish you well.
Thank you, Mr. Sulu. Very important remarks. And now I would like to ask our travel director, Maria-Elena Andre, to give her opening remarks, please. The floor is yours, Maria-Elena. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marcelo, and a big good morning for everyone. It's already good afternoon where I'm sitting, but and it's very cold, I have to say. We have snow announced for later this week, so there's a big difference between where we are and where you are, or even where Dennis is, because Dennis is still back home. And I would like to give him a special warm welcome because it's the first time that we coincide in an activity. Dennis having his new capacity of director of the Decent Work Team of the Caribbean, and I would like to congratulate him for that. And I'm sure that we will have the chance to cross our paths again very often in the near future. So very well welcome to all of you to this webinar. And I have to say that I'm very, very happy to have the opportunity to be with you, with the Caribbean trade union leaders, and to share some of our thoughts and concerns regarding the difficult times we're currently experiencing. I mean, Dennis has said it, there is no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has and will continue to have an unprecedented impact on the economies and on the labor markets of Latin America and the Caribbean, but virtually of every country in the world. And I would like to remind ourselves that more than 100 years later, and 1 year after marking the centenary of the ILO with the adoption of the Centenary Declaration on the Future of Work, we find ourselves yet again at the forefront of finding solutions to a deadly pandemic, which is threatening the health, but also the livelihoods of workers around the globe. It's also threatening the economic activity and the functioning of many enterprises. If we look at the ECLAC ILO estimates, the greatest impact of the pandemic was felt in the second quarter of the year, where we have seen approximately 47 million job losses in the region as a whole, when compared to the previous year. ECLEC ILO projections also indicate that all the measures taken by the region's governments will lead to the worst contraction in the region's GDP ever. And this is estimated at 9.1% in 2020. We must also put into this analysis the links that the Caribbean has with the rest of the world and the deep disruption of sectors on which it depends, such as tourism, trade, but all the others that Dennis has already mentioned. And according to the IDB, in the Bahamas, Barbados, and Jamaica, between 34 and 48% of the GDP comes from tourism, and with the sector at a standstill, we can only see that the repercussions are enormous. ILO recognizes that women, young people, migrants, and domestic workers are likely to be hit hardest by this pandemic. And as you already know, the ILO has devised a policy framework on COVID-19, which looks into 4 distinct pillars that will guide our work in assisting our constituents throughout the crisis. The first pillar, stimulating the economy and labor, and also making use of all the macroeconomic tools at our disposal. The second one on supporting businesses, jobs, and incomes. The third one on the protection of workers in the workplace. And the fourth one, which is the subject of our webinar today, is about utilizing social dialogue for solutions as an imperative in order to build forward better than where we were before the pandemic. Now, this pillar calls for the strengthening of the capacity of the social partners and of the government, as well as strengthening social dialogue, collective bargaining, and labor relations institutions and processes. So we all know in this room today that social dialogue is key to involving trade unions in the design, but also in the implementation of policies and decisions during and after the crisis. And if we look back, past experiences have demonstrated the value of social dialogue in designing effective solutions to mitigate the consequences of past crises, but also of this crisis, we are sure, and to promote recovery. And building confidence through trust and dialogue is going to be crucial to make policy measures effective. We know from experience in early crises that social dialogues result in strong, consensus-driven policy responses and ensure that they serve those who most need them. And I think that the spirit that followed the foundation of the ILO, very much reflected in the Centenary Declaration, is that no organization, no country, no government can tackle the challenges we are currently facing by themselves. So we need truly global challenges requiring truly global solutions that include a constant dialogue between governments, workers, and employers at the national, the regional, and in the global level. In many countries, and especially in the Caribbean region, workers' organizations have been at the forefront of responding to some of the challenges posed by the crisis. For example, you have been proactively developing policy proposals for government action on social protection and on employment retention schemes that have been discussed within the framework of the social dialogue institutions. You have successfully influenced and supported the national policies on life, on employment, and on income protection. So today, more than ever, the ILO constituents must continue to fulfill their mandates on formulating solutions through effective social dialogue that also includes collective bargaining. Also, in order to further strengthen social dialogue, the state has a key role to play, as Dennis has reminded us all in his initial remarks. The state has a key role to play in ensuring and enabling environment for the full realization of the fundamental rights of freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining. And in addition to ensuring that laws and institutions are well designed and that their implementation guarantees compliance with the law, the state can also consider other ways of actively promoting dialogue and collective bargaining. For example, by linking access to stimulus funds to demonstrated use of social dialogue, including collective bargaining at national and sectoral levels. So, dear colleagues and dear friends, we are fully aware that we are in a transformational crisis and that more, much more, needs to be done to build not to the new normal, but to the better normal, as our Director General Guy Ryder insists every time he has the opportunity to express himself in public. Undoubtedly, the ILO Centenary Declaration, which calls for a people-centered approach, and the UN's Sustainable Development Goals remain two vital policy frameworks for building a post-crisis world that leaves no one behind. And I would like to reiterate our commitment as ACTRAF to continue working with you, to continue assisting you in fulfilling our mandate and your mandate, and to serve the constituents in all parts of the world in the most effective way. And these ongoing dialogues, like the one we're having today, are very important because we continue to take advantage of the technologies of our disposal, and that allow us to stay connected and to continue listening to your concerns and to continue assisting in the areas that are more problematic for your work at the national level in the context of your institutional social dialogue structures. We will have further opportunities to discuss responses and strategies to address the impact of the pandemic. But for now, I think we will have a closer look at the Caribbean initiatives relating to social dialogue that are efficacious, but also the agreements amongst workers, employers, and governments that are being considered. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be following your discussions with a great attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria Elena. Indeed, this is very important, and I would like to highlight Mr. Dennis Ulu and your remarks. The Centenary Declaration, along with Sustainable Development Goals, are the frameworks that would help us facilitate and to provide solutions to the current pandemic. Just for quality purposes, let me remind you that this session is being recorded, and we would provide a summary of this meeting to the colleagues who were not able to make it at this time of the day. And without that being said, I would like to invite my colleague Melanie to give us her presentation. Whenever you're ready, Melanie. Thank you.
I'm ready now. So good morning to you all. Good afternoon for those who are joining in Europe and in Africa. As Maria Elena was saying, I mean, it's very cold here. It's 3 degrees, so would have really liked to be in that part of the world with you today, but unfortunately this is not possible. So I'm Mélanie Jean-Roy for the Bureau for Workers' Activity in Geneva, ACTRAF. I deal with a number of issues, including international labor standards and social dialogue and fundamental principles and rights at work. And my presentation today will give you an overview of the global trends on the use of social dialogue during the COVID-19 pandemic. So let me just share with you my screen. So this requires a few seconds manipulation. And of course, now that's not working. Okay, sorry, just 1 second, please. Sure. I am just 1 second. I'm sorry for that. I can, okay. Now I have it. And let me just do. Okay, so as I said, my presentation today would focus on the global trends on the use of social dialogue during the COVID-19 pandemic, based on ILO research from ACTRAF and also a social dialogue unit. So during the, well, maybe I would just, sorry. It might be better if I just shut down my video for a second because it might be too heavy on my computer.
Totally fine, yes.
Yes, 1 second, please. We still have to get used to this. Okay, can you, what can you see now? Can you see my video, can you see my screen? The full,
yes. We see the presentation, yes, but I think that you need to click on presentation. Oh, there you, that's better.
there you go.
Yes. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Sorry for that. This is the joy of a virtual meeting. So during this presentation, I would like to first highlight the role of social dialogue in times of crisis, briefly introduce the pillar, even though this has been already done by the previous speakers, but on the ILO policy framework on COVID-19. I will then present some of the main findings from the research. So as I said, that was carried out by the ILO on the extent of which social dialogue was used during the first phase of the crisis. So basically between mid-March to early summer. So active analysis, which is forthcoming, is going to be published soon, addresses other issues such as trade union actions carried out for the members and the workers in general, including the development of new services. But for the purpose of this presentation, I will only focus on the use of social dialogue. We'll then talk about some of the challenges observed and conclude with some lessons learned. So from an ILO perspective, social dialogue based on respect for freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining has a crucial role in designing policies to promote social justice, decent work, and sustainable enterprises. As in times of prosperity, in times of crisis too, social dialogue can help to reconcile competing interests and to build trust in, commitment to, and ownership of policies. For 101 years, social dialogue and tripartism has played a decisive role in addressing major global crises. I mean, first of all, the aftermath of the First World War, the Spanish flu pandemic, the Great Depression, the Second World War, the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the 2007 and 2009 global financial crisis. And as Maria-Elena also mentioned, I mean, a number of studies from the ILO and beyond that dealt with the impact of that crisis and recovery measures pointed out to successful mitigating measures through social dialogue. A recent ILO standard, Recommendation 205 on employment and decent work for peace and resilience, adopted in 2017, reaffirmed the importance of social dialogue and called upon member states to recognize the vital role of employers and workers' organizations in crisis response. Given the unprecedented nature of the crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, social dialogue, as we say, is more important than ever. Oops, sorry, I think I skipped. So this is why social dialogue, as we already said, is one of the main components of the policy framework developed by the ILO in May, which aim at providing ILO constituents with a roadmap to cope with the socio-economic impacts of the COVID-19 in line with its Centenary Declaration. So I've already mentioned that the first 3 pillars focus on stimulating the economy and employment. The second one, supporting enterprises and jobs and income. And the third one on protecting workers in the workplace. And then the last one, which is the topic of our presentation today, on relying on social dialogue for solutions. And this includes the strengthening of the capacity and the resilience of the actors of social dialogue, so employers, workers, and organizations, and the government, and also strengthening social dialogue, collective bargaining, and labor relation institutions and processes. So now I would like to turn to the main finding of the ILO research on the use of social dialogue during the initial phase, so as I said, from mid-March to mid-June, for the social dialogue, for the first research that was done, and active research goes over to mid-August. So this shows that many countries, actually 134 out of 188, or 71%, did use social dialogue whether tripartite or bipartite, either singly or together, to address the pandemic and its impact. And this figure only concerns social dialogue at what we call peak level, meaning like national, sectoral, cross-sectoral, but they do not address company level dialogue. So for example, collective bargaining agreements at company level. And this research was based on the ILO definition of social dialogue, which covers negotiations, consultations, or exchange of information between governments and national organizations of employers and workers. And in my next slide, this would like to show this map, which illustrates the global prevalence of social dialogue. So in green, you will see the countries in which there was no national tripartite or bipartite social dialogue observed. In dark blue, those in which both tripartite and bipartite was observed. In yellow, only bipartite social dialogue, and in blue, those with tripartite social dialogue only. Now if we have a closer look at the regional distribution, we observe that there is an imbalance between the region, with the highest proportion in Europe and Central Asia, 80%, followed by Africa, 74%, and the lowest proportion in the Arab state, 42%. But as we said, this does not capture company level dialogue, which we know, for example, in that region and in all the region occurs as well. So our analysis showed that in the Americas, social dialogue was used in 60% of the countries. However, it is very important to emphasize that our reports from trade unions show that most of the countries concerned were actually from your region, from the Caribbean, and only few countries in Latin America implemented social dialogue mechanisms. Turning now to the forms of social dialogue used, we observed that the most common form of social dialogue used by governments and national organizations of employers and workers was tripartite social dialogue at the cross-sectoral and sectoral level. Among the 134 countries and territories using peak level social dialogue, 13% use bipartite social dialogue, 46% only the tripartite form, and 42% both forms. Thus, alone or in combination, bipartite social dialogue has been used in 54% of the countries and tripartite social dialogue in 87%. By region, in Europe and Central Asia, 68% used tripartite social dialogue and 47% the bipartite form alone or in combination. A similar pattern is seen in Africa, 62% and 43% respectively, Asia and the Pacific, and the America around 60% and over 30% respectively. The Arab state had the lowest rate at 42% and 17% respectively. So in most cases, social dialogue was used outside existing structures or through ad hoc national tripartite committees or bipartite bodies that were specifically set up at national level to tackle the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis. And what we saw from our research is that 77% of the reported outcomes that were reached through social dialogue were reached outside existing structure or through ad hoc structure. And in some cases, existing tripartite bodies have been utilized for the same purpose, but not that many. And this denotes either a certain unpreparedness of existing structures for a national emergency, or also a lack of willingness on behalf of government to engage through existing structures. While it may also relate to the fact that national tripartite social dialogue structures are often seen as bodies with a strategic long-term orientation that rather than a short-term operational one. The creation of ad hoc social dialogue structure illustrates the adaptive and agile nature of social dialogue, depending on national circumstances. Still, such ad hoc structures need the social partners to be involved and challenges in coordination between the formal and the ad hoc processes to be addressed. What we've also observed is that social partners' involvement changed from country to country. Countries with a solid industrial relations adopted a more participatory model, which allowed social partners to influence effectively the policy responses to the crisis. On the contrary, trade unions operating in countries with less consolidated industrial relations or characterized by difficult conditions of constrained democracy expressed their dissatisfaction in terms of social partners' insufficient involvement in decision-making processes. However, they did make a significant effort to try to engage in social dialogue and submitted proposals to the government. So now if we move to the achievements through social dialogue, we observe that in relation to tripartite social dialogue, the most frequent subjects of negotiation have been social protection, employment measures, as well as commitment towards collaborative industrial relations and fiscal and OSH measures. So with regard to social protections, actions negotiated through tripartite social dialogue included healthcare, for example, allocation of additional budget to ensure access to healthcare, including free testing services for workers, sickness benefits, extended duration and payment of sickness benefits since the first day of the sickness, family leave and care to support workers who could not telework due to family responsibility, and special childcare facilities and long-term care. Then in relation to social assistance, we've seen also income support to the population in need through social assistance, cash transfer program, and other support to respond to the economic consequences of the pandemics. Temporary job and income protection measures were also adopted to support workers and employers affected by the lockdown, including enhanced short-term work schemes and an employment benefit up to a certain percentage of the reference wage, as well as extension of unemployment benefit to those often excluded, such as informal and self-employed workers. Mandatory payment of wages to certain categories of suspended workers, such as workers over 60, pregnant women, and high-risk people with diseases. Increase of wage and additional benefits for health workers, prohibition of layoffs, and anticipation of annual leave and paid leave. Temporary flexible working arrangements were also negotiated, such as encouraging telework modalities, shift work, granting cash benefits to purchase necessary equipment, IT items, subsidies for internet costs, and various supplies. In relation to dispute resolution, in some cases, tripartite ad hoc committees were created to collect claims and solve collective disputes and individual ones. Also, in some cases, social partners have participated in the design and implementation of fiscal measures, such as financial support to enterprises through deferrals of social protection contribution, tax breaks, and favorable loans and interest rates in order to guarantee business continuity and to avoid further job loss. In addition, tripartite social dialogue concentrated on the enhancement and enforcement of OSH regulations to ensure safe and healthy conditions for workers at the workplace. These included strengthening of existing national OSH legislation or adoption of adequate regulations were not in place. Enactment of OSH protocols based on the WHO guidelines to make sure that appropriate measure would be implemented and enforced with participation of all actors involved. Monitoring of compliance with OSH regulation with the support of Ministry of Labor and Labor Inspectorates, as well as social partners at company level. Turning now to bipartite social dialogue, it's worth noting that employers and workers often express similar concerns when governments adopted insufficient measures. In response, they developed joint statements and proposals to lobby government when designing policy responses to COVID-19. In some cases, those consisted of requests for implementation of social dialogue mechanisms and more involvement of social partners in the decision-making processes. In many instances, social partners discussed and implemented enhanced measures to ensure the safety and health of workers. And these included temporary suspension or reduction of activities, as well as reopening of factories in compliance, of course, with the quarantine requirements when these were in place. Issuing of safe return to work guide protocols, distribution of materials, informative meetings or training and workshops on COVID-19, adoption of shift work to reduce large gathering at the workplace and ensure physical distancing, provision of in-kind support such as PPE, so personal protective equipment, the sanitation of workplaces, and the setup of individual and collective transportation. MOU dealing with a number of issues were also signed in several countries. In Kenya, for example, social partners signed a memorandum of understanding to reaffirm the commitment to a coordinated action, the respect of OSH regulation, and the prevention of collective dismissals. In several Asian countries, MOU in the garment sector envisaged the prohibition of layoffs as well. This was the case in Bangladesh. In Europe and Latin America, social partners negotiated or renegotiated collective bargaining agreements to enhance employment guarantees, including measures to secure wages and temporary flexible working arrangements. In several instances, social partners work together to advance industrial relations, for example, through the creation of working groups to resolve existing industrial relations issues. It's also interesting to note that the commitment towards harmonious labor relations and constructive social dialogue have been included in most of the signed collective bargaining agreements. We've also observed that national bipartite or tripartite social dialogue not only shaped government policies, but also importantly triggered additional instances of social dialogue at lower level, namely sectoral or enterprise levels. And out of the 177 social dialogue outcomes that were reported, 20% recommended additional social dialogue at the territorial, sectoral, or enterprise level. And now I would like to share with you two interesting examples illustrating the articulation amongst the various levels of social dialogue. And this concerns Italy and Argentina. So in Italy, tripartite social dialogue with the participation of the Minister of Labor and the Prime Minister led to the formulation of labor legislation and other policy measures on March and April. But these were actually largely shaped by bipartite protocols. So it was the bipartite social dialogue which shaped the bipartite protocol, which was first concluded and then shaped the national legislation. And the protocol that was signed in early March was included as an annex to the government decree. And the protocol triggered then social dialogue and collective agreement at sectoral level, containing OSH measures, including in banking, transport, construction, and logistics. And this was followed by an updated version of the protocol, which provided for the creation of specific committees composed of workers' representatives and employees at company level, so in order to ensure its implementation and monitoring. In Argentina, an agreement that was signed on the 27th of April between the UIA employers body, Argentine Industrial Union, the CGT trade union, the General Confederation of Labor, and the government aimed to assure the payment of workers' wages. The agreement stated that workers who could not work owing to COVID-19 related measures would receive 75% of their regular net salary, 2/3 coming from the states and 1/3 from the employers. And based on this agreement, the commerce sector social partners signed a framework agreement in April. And in other sectors, such as basic metal productions, new sector agreements contain terms with more advantageous conditions than the national agreement. So now, one of the other findings of the research shows that only a small majority of social dialogue outcomes, and actually 8%, concern measures that were specifically targeting workers and business units in the informal economy, migrant workers, freelancers, and the self-employed and the most vulnerable in general. So they consisted mainly of calls for extending social protection measures to these groups. This was, for example, the case in North Macedonia for informal economy workers, Kenya for migrant workers, and Uruguay for self-employed and freelancers. And in Kenya, it was also interesting to see that the tripartite memorandum of understanding included measures specific to migrant workers, which allowed those who lost their job to maintain their residency status and work permits with no change in their migration status. And in North Macedonia, part of the government measures agreed with the social partners in the Economic and Social Council allowed workers in the informal economy to access social protection benefits during a limited period and also to receive a stipend of $125 per household. Now, I would like to say a few words here about other forms of interactions which have been observed, but which do not fall within the ILO definition of social dialogue. And these are what we call bilateral interactions between government and trade union, or between government and employers organization. An ACTRAV analysis based on the information that we receive from the union show that bilateral interaction between government and trade unions took place in 42 out of 133 countries and territories. And as you can see in this chart, such interactions were reported in 50% of the country under consideration in the Arab states, 39 in Europe and Central Asia, followed by 35 in Asian and Pacific countries, 28 in the Americas, and 23 countries in Africa. And in many cases, this took place in countries where there was no tripartite social dialogue that was reported. In few other countries, government engaged with trade union as preliminary steps, or in addition to ongoing tripartite social dialogue. And in some other cases, governments engaged with trade unions and with employers separately. And these exchanges focus on issues that were also the ones that were discussed through social dialogue, such as amendment to existing legislation, retrenchment and unemployment benefits, income support to certain categories of workers, health and safety measures. And government further called upon trade unions during this meeting that were set up to assist in the identification of the vulnerable population and to play a role in raising awareness among workers and the population at large. For the last part of this presentation, before turning to the lessons learned, I would like to address, this was also raised by Mariana, a key challenge that was faced by the trade union for effectively engaging in social dialogue. And that is the erosion in some countries of workers and trade union rights. We all know that social dialogue does require the respect for the fundamental rights and principle of freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining in line with ILO Convention 87 and 98. The information received from trade union revealed that the crisis has exacerbated democratic deficiencies were already existing, with serious consequences in terms of respect of workers' rights as well as other human rights. In this regard, violation of trade union workers' rights during the COVID-19 crisis have been reported by several trade unions across the regions, also to a varying extent, as you will see from the graph. 67% of the country in the Arab states, 35% Asian Pacific, 29% Europe and Central Asia, 25% of African countries, and 20% in America. And while not all the reports concern violation of freedom of association and collective bargaining, but also some other issues such as OSH requirements, infringement of trade union rights, and in particular, did constitute an important part of the reported violation. And these included arrest or imprisonment of trade union, restriction on trade union meeting, restriction on collective bargaining. And we've also observed a broad tendency in some governments abusing emergency powers and decrees to fast-track legislative amendments curtailing trade union rights. And we've seen an increase in the number of complaints to the Committee on Freedom of Association, as well as requests to the Director General for ILO urgent intervention. And we also expect this issue to be highlighted in the next report on the Committee of Experts, which is currently in session. So now, a little bit interludes. We're talking about trade union rights. I would like to take this opportunity to briefly inform you that ACTRAV has produced a web application on freedom of association for workers across the world. And this is a tool that was designed to be user-friendly and interactive, and which focuses on two main areas. The first part on understanding the standard and principle on freedom of association, and the second one on understanding how ILO procedures can be used when freedom of association is infringed. So you have the link here. I'll copy it again in the chat box, and we invite you to consult it, and we hope we'll find it useful for your work, and we welcome any feedback that you may have. So before closing, I would like to conclude with a few lessons learned. First of all, an extensive use of social dialogue does lead to more effective policy making, and we've had good examples during the first month of the crisis, as we saw. This is because it leads to better informed policies and improved ownership and trust in the institution and regulations. And second, investing in tripartism stimulates autonomous bipartite social dialogue between workers and employers at lower level, territorial, sectoral, enterprise. Synergies between different levels of regulation and measures will be crucial in the post-COVID-19 recovery phase. And the first point here is that there is a need to address long-standing capacity and institutional gaps, the elimination of legal and practical obstacles faced by social dialogue actors and institutions to participate in policymaking remain pressing. And removing those obstacles and using social dialogue also during the recovery phase will constitute important safeguards against eroding labor rights and working conditions, and against further undermining what is now a fragile social context in many countries. And I would like to thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to hearing about your experience, including good practices and challenging regarding the use of social dialogue mechanisms in your region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. I think it is important that we also acknowledge, the results from this research, and I'm pretty sure that the data that you have been providing us this morning will facilitate the work that we're doing in the Caribbean. And indeed, I would like to agree with you that our office in the Caribbean has received an increase in requests for social dialogue. And this is why we're doing this webinar, to share what is it that it's been done in our region. So I would like to ask my colleague and dear friend, Ms. Shirley Price, to help us with her presentation and share in lessons learned in her initiative in Jamaica. Sister Shirley, the floor is yours when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First, I must say that I'm not feeling very well. I'm having a cough. So if you hear me coughing through the presentation, please forgive me. Yes, good morning again, each and everyone. And again, I must say welcome to Director Zulu. We in the Caribbean welcome you. And we're looking forward to working with you, because we know that you started out, very passionate, and we can see where we're going to be having an excellent and robust relationship. So welcome again. Thank you. We're looking forward to working with you, sir, and the team. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Today, I'll be looking at, my presentation will be how Jamaica Household Workers Union leverage social dialogue. As we know, domestic workers are the backbone of society. Our jobs are very important. For many years, we have been clamoring for a change, and our burning issues remain the same. We are fighting for recognition, to be called workers, and to enjoy and exercise our rights as all other workers. Thus, we would not have been left behind in this crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic has made life so difficult for domestic workers. The workforce before Corona was already incredibly insecure and vulnerable. The economic crisis combined with COVID-19 are increasingly put pressure or pressuring on domestic workers. While the primary focus of government is to contain the spread of COVID-19, the risk emerging from the shortcomings of the labor and social protection and the impact of these risks on the most vulnerable group in society have increased and worsened considerably and are becoming critical. Some of the critical issues we face here in Jamaica are that domestic workers are sent home from work without pay, some since March. Some cannot work simply because they have their children at home because school is closed. Most of the living domestic workers who are still working report denial of days off and have heavy workload. with no personal protective equipment, and have higher exposure to chemical and working excessive long hours. They are unable to pay their bills or buy food, unable to provide the basic necessity for their family. Sorry. Prices are rising rapidly. Things like detergent, soap, and sanitizer, some domestic workers cannot afford to buy. Food prices have also increased, which make it more difficult for workers to access same. They are left out of the social security net. As domestic workers goes, most time they're living pay by pay each week. That is, we say in Jamaica, we living hand to mouth. They did not prepare for this normal and don't have savings to cushion save. Social dialogue is very important and has a key role to play in tackling these challenges. Our union have pushed to advance social dialogue for a solution. As we well know, this will strengthen the capacity of our organization in building back better. Through social dialogue, we were able to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Minister of Labor. We at our union were given a station with 2 computers, 2 computer desks. We were given a state-of-the-art printer with internet. This internet-based system help workers and recruiters to fill job opportunities. It is employers can post job openings and search for a matching domestic workers from wherever they are. Likewise, we in our union and as domestic workers can do the same. We can post our profile on the Minister of Labor system. We can search through and find a matching employer that we would like to work with. So this is very powerful for us because it's a move in the right direction that government is taking. We also were asked as the union to provide and submit and present to Parliament gaps as seen in both the OSHA and the violence and harassment legislation being discussed in Parliament now. Because we want the domestic workers to be as inclusive as possible in this law. So we came together with persons, civil society organization, persons from the University of the West Indies, and we look at the policies that they have, and we look at the gaps, and we will be making presentation in Parliament. Matter of fact, Thursday will be our presentation. This Thursday, the 3rd, will be our presentation in Parliament. And also, through social dialogue, we collaborated with many private sectors, trade unions, and funding agencies. And we were able to get money to provide domestic workers with 2,500 food packages. We gave out gloves and masks, sanitizer, this has enabled domestic workers to continue working. We gave out cash for transport allowance. We gave out cash to needy domestic workers who have many children. We gave out a payday to some domestic workers. We provide information on how to protect domestic workers to be COVID-free. We do research through University of the West Indies to inform our advocacy. We also do fundraising, online fundraising to help mitigate the pressure faced, and this was helped through social dialogue also because a company came in and helped us set up this fundraising initiative. We gave out information daily according to Minister of Health protocol. We got our internet paid for by the Minister of Gender, Bureau of Gender Affairs, through the Bureau of Gender Affairs, through our social dialogue method. We were able to promote alternate livelihood and got funding for domestic workers to do same. Some domestic workers now are able to do chicken rearing. Some are able to do like the layers that they do eggs, layers that lay, the folate lay the eggs that they're into the egg business now. Some are able to do candles, make candles, make drinks, and all this was funded by our partners, some of our partners. There is no proposal being discussed right now with Grace Kennedy, one of the biggest food chain across the Caribbean, to procure tablets for 25 domestic workers, children, to enable them to access school. There are always domestic workers left behind because the government have this system in place right now. But if the person are not part of the system, they cannot get that benefit. And domestic worker always has been left behind. We are left behind out of the government care package, so we are not part of that system. We also were able to join the Council for Voluntary Social Services, which enable us to access pension plan, to access health insurance, to access learning and training and capacity building, you know, to have a unified advocacy with other NGO and social issues, to increase our visibility of our work in the social sector services. And it is because of our social dialogue, they came on board and gave us 1,000 packages. And out of that, we register with them to be part of their as a member of their organization. Through our partnership in social dialogue, our union movement has become an increasingly important player in Jamaica. We build a wide network of partners and allies. We have a strong media presence and the ability to influence issues on the development agenda. Jamaica Household Workers Union, since the pandemic, have been all over the media, print and electronic media. Every radio station calling us. We are very boisterous. We make a lot of noise here in Jamaica. So they've been calling us to see what has happened since the government reached out to us, whether they reach out to us or not, and how we are coping. So we have been getting a lot of traction from the media. It was social dialogue when we won Convention 189 at the ILO in Geneva. Sister Ida is online here, she can attest to this. You know, we have been working very closely together. And to get so many ratifications globally. It was social dialogue when we won Convention 190 at ILO in Geneva. I was there 2 years to really fight for that. It is very important to push social dialogue all the time. But despite the bad with COVID, there is some good. And our union were able to register 63 new members. That's domestic workers that walk in to file, come to us to file complaint or to pick up food packages. However, they were unable to pay any application fee. In fact, the Jamaica Household Worker Union have not met since March, despite their need to sustain our organization. But despite all of the above, domestic workers were left out of the government care plan. We fought on our own to get help through social dialogue. So today, we are using this medium to call on government, public sector, trade union, in setting up an emergency fund to help domestic workers. In instances like this, we need to set up our educational institution to have trained, educated domestic workers. As an increased access to education contribute to reduction in poverty. If domestic worker was educated, we wouldn't have left behind because the system that the government put in place for us to register online to get the benefit, we weren't able to do that. Domestic worker weren't able to go online. As one domestic worker asked me, said to me, the only line she knows is clothesline. So then therefore we have to educate them how to get in the system or else we're gonna be leaving behind forever. We need to push for this. We are calling on the government to formalize domestic worker so we can have our NIS, in force. Thank God the International Labour Organization is working with us in getting our system formalized here in Jamaica. Thank you, ILO. We are looking forward to the working relationship again. We are asking the government to pass the OSHA bill, the Occupational Health and Safety. Too long this amendments, it is at the amendment stage. And we are pushing for that. For enforcement of Convention 189, which is the Domestic Worker Convention. We ratified the convention 2016, but we don't have enforcement of the laws. Ratification of Convention 190, which is the elimination of the violence and harassment in the world of work, which tied in nicely with the sexual harassment legislation that is being discussed right now in Parliament. We need help and push to promote measures to guarantee continued employment in domestic work, to extend and promote unemployment benefit for domestic workers, to help domestic workers to get health coverage, not just some, all domestic workers, to ensure that care services are considered a priority, to promote comprehensive social protection system, and to promote social dialogue and digital training. Domestic workers need to have digital training, you know, because so we can have access. So too much times we are left behind because we don't have access. To promote awareness campaign and the rights of domestic workers. What we really need now, not tomorrow, is really need of investment, government to invest in people. And that's what we need to push for, investment in people. The COVID-19 crisis have exposed the particularly vulnerability of domestic workers, emphasizing the urgent need to ensure that they are effectively included in the labor and social protection. COVID-19 pandemic does not justify any restriction on the fundamentals rights at work. Domestic workers' rights, we know that there is quarantine over the whole world, but domestic workers' rights must not be quarantined. It should be equal opportunity for all. This must change. We are saying time come. This must change now. The crisis showing the widened cracks that exist. If people are vulnerable, then the economy is so much vulnerable too. We need changes now. We cannot continue with this same old as we're going on for years. We need more social and inclusive dialogue in order to design a better, a more impartial nation. If you've got workers, employers, and civil society at the table with government at all levels, then you can design the kind of future that takes into account the right priorities for people, for the country, and of course, for a steady system. With the ongoing and the increasing uncertainties, one thing remains certain. Because of the resilience, of our resilience, the Jamaica Household Workers Union will, through social dialogue, through education, coordination, and organization, fight and push for victories. We shall overcome and build a better normal. Lastly, time come to open the doors for domestic workers. Care for those who care for you. Let us all invest in domestic work. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Lily, for your presentation. And now I'd like to give the floor to my brother, Mr. Michael Anisette, to give to share the experience that we're currently having in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Anisette, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Are you seeing me? You hear me now?
We can definitely hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Pleasant day to all. And my friend, the moderator. And I want to echo the sentiments of the previous speaker that we look forward to working with our good friend, and I'm calling him a comrade and a friend, Mr. Zulu, and the team from Mantra, because we think it is necessary. And I will want to get into my discourse by first pointing out that one, when the COVID-19 was realized, the National Trade Union Center would have implored the government, we would have written to the government expressing some concerns that this issue was not only a health issue, but it was an economic and social issue. And therefore, the social partners must come together as a necessity in order to address what we would have seen as the long-term social fallout occasioned by the pandemic. And for whatever it was, where the government at that time did not take on what the National Trade Union Center was saying. But when we let me now fast forward to when we got into the issue of the real issues facing us with COVID-19 and our country was shut down. The government then realized the necessity of getting the stakeholders involved. And we did what we will call a roadmap to the recovery of COVID-19 and the economy. And that roadmap would have involved all the major stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago. The trade union moved out of that roadmap. And I, in fact, represented the NATOC. And therefore, we made our proposals in the context of ensuring that the most vulnerable in our society is taken care of. Because if we fail to do that, we will not be actually addressing the fallout. And coming out of that roadmap to recovery, several proposals that was generated from the National Trade Union Center form part of the government proposals. And we would have seen the question of workers being paid by the government. We would have seen the whole question of the government taking some positions in order to assist the private sector in the context of releasing funds on the clear understanding that the employment levels would not be affected. And as a consequence of that roadmap, what we discovered, and I think everybody discovered, was how important the question of social dialogue, tripartitism, bipartitism, is important in crisis. It's unfortunate that it took a crisis to understand the measure and the thinking of the ILO when the ILO would have subscribed to the whole general principle of social dialogue and also tripartitism. And let me go on. The National Trade Union Center would have been able to engage in a unilateral, and I don't want to say unilateral, but in the context of unions where we have recognition with, we were able to engage those companies in what I want to call very in-depth and meaningful discussions using obviously the ILO guidelines as it relates to the COVID-19 to ensure that we put measures in place to protect workers on the job site. Because what happened is that the government would have deemed which companies was essential. However, the government did not deem the trade union to be an essential industry or an essential body, notwithstanding the fact that they extend that privilege to the law association. And what that brought about was an inability of the trade union movement and NATOC as a federation to engage on a daily basis with workers who we call frontline workers, for example, the port workers, which we represent, for example, the healthcare workers, for example, the workers that work in the pharmacies, and all the workers that drive the buses, All right, all these essential workers at one point in time was left to paddle, so to speak, their trade union canoe by themselves. But however, the trade union movement being creative as we are, we did create our own measures in terms of how we would keep in contact with these groups of workers and how we will address the issues that obviously would have flowed from the COVID-19, which was very new, which was unusual, which nobody catered for, and which no employer and no the government and the trade union had an appreciation for, given the dynamics of the particular COVID-19 situation. So as we move forward, what we did, for example, where we had RMU, which is the recognized majority unions, and I must compliment the private sector through the ECA, we were able to engage those employers in what I want to call meaningful and genuine discussions using, the bipartite mechanism, using the ILO concept of social dialogue to address issues that were affecting workers. And I'm happy to report that we were able to determine that most of the companies that we represented would have retained the workers, notwithstanding the fact that there was a shutdown, and ensure that those workers were paid for the period of time that they were owed. We were able to negotiate that kind of understanding. And I also want to place on record that the answer group of companies, they saw it in their wisdom, and they formed what I will call an employer union involvement, because they are the biggest employer in Trinidad and Tobago, and I must say through the Caribbean region. And we were able to engage their management team in what I want to call constructive discussions to come up with measures that was creative and innovative, bearing in mind that we were operating in a particular situation where some of the companies had to shut down because they weren't deemed essential. And I must say that during the roadmap recovery committee, I was able to impress upon the roadmap committee headed by the Honorable Prime Minister to ensure certain companies that was critical to the economy was reopened, because they were on the brink of extinction if they did not open. And I'm saying all of this in the context so that we will understand the value of social dialogue, the value in a crisis where there is an openness of our minds, where there is a meeting of minds, and where the issue of collective wisdom becomes paramount, and where issues, not only worker-centered issues, but issues that involve the very existence and the survival of companies who generate the employment, who generate the economy, because that was the mantra of the National Trade Union Center. You cannot have jobs if you don't have workers. You cannot, a company cannot survive if they don't have workers. A worker cannot survive if you do not have jobs, and the economy cannot generate economic growth if the country doesn't have the ability to buy the goods and services that the companies produces. And therefore, the issue of ensuring as far as humanly possible to keep people employed was the mantra of the National Trade Union Center. And I must also say, there was a recognition by the employer of that reality, because what the pandemic would have shown is that workers who one consider as essential or important to the economy became the frontline workers. And if those groups of workers did not perform, if those groups of workers did not go out and do what they were supposed to do, All right, if the bus drivers, if the dock workers did not go and stuff the containers or offload the vessels for the very important goods that was required, well, then the economy would have come to a standstill. And I think that is a lesson that we would have taken away from the pandemic and the situations that it would have caused us as the trade union. And as I say, we had to recalibrate our thinking in the context of the realities that we were facing. We begin to realize that it's not them against us, but this was about Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, for Trinidad and Tobago to survive as a country, that we needed that social dialogue where a lot of people would have frowned on, where a lot of people would not have practiced it in its genuinity. We began to understand the need and the necessity for so doing. And while the pandemic, all right, would of course some health problems, but as I say, that too will pass. But what it would have brought to the forefront, a kind of genuinity of interchange, a type of recognition that we are really all in this together, you know. And we are hoping that after the pandemic, which I know it must go, that that level of trust, the level of openness, the level of collective thinking will continue so that Trinidad and Tobago will be better. But let me go a little further. Angostura, where we represent locals, we were able to make a decision that workers give up about 3 or 4 days of their vacation leave that they had inside to contribute towards a fund so that we could have distribute food baskets within the depressed areas and the disadvantaged workers and vulnerable people within the society. And I'm proud to report, and that was a trade union initiative, that we were able to raise over $1 million, all right, and we were able to satisfy more than 2,000 households in terms of giving them foodstuffs, all right, as a recognition of the role of the trade union movement to transform from only collective bargaining, but to also understand that we have a social responsibility to address issues outside of just collective bargaining and trade disputes. Let me go a little further. The National Trade Union Center would have entered into an arrangement with, and I think I would have sent a copy of the launch that we did to my good friend Marcelo. And then what we came up with, all right, with a fintech company is to offer unsecured loans to our membership, unsecured loans from $2,000 to $5,000 at a rate of only 2%. You know, and again, this is where you are faced with a crisis. This is where the issue of your creative juice now comes to the forefront, and it forces you to look at areas and to look at measures that will assist your membership and by extension the poor and disadvantaged in our society. And we are proud of that because we are saying to the society that we are not only talking the talk, but we are walking the walk also by these initiatives. And let me go a little further. The National Trade Union Center too would have distributed food baskets to more than 1,000 families in Trinidad and Tobago. We went to the disadvantaged places in Trinidad and Tobago, and the level of poverty that we saw, I mean, tears came to my eyes. And again, this happened because of the COVID-19. And then we say in the National Trade Union Center that this is a blessing in disguise. Let us deal with some of the negatives now. The government, while the government would have participated in the roadmap and they did form a committee to look at the roadmap, they did set up a committee to look at Laventille, a vulnerable place, because it had a lot of social issues coming out from there. But the government to date have failed to address the issue of wages, which is, as we say, a violation of the two fundamental principles and the right to collective bargaining. Using the COVID measure to announce it in a budget rather than engaging the National Trade Union Center, who would have written 8 letters to date seeking an audience with the government in order to address the particular issue in the context of the realities that we are facing. Because we do not believe that collective bargaining should be circumvented, because the government as an employer, we believe, must understand their rights and their roles as employers as opposed to the government as a government. So then we have that particular crisis. I have also mentioned the government failure in the earliest to recognize the trade union movement as essential, thereby stultifying our ability to go outside there and represent our workers who are on the front line. And there were a lot of issues affecting those groups of workers, but we were able to get around that particular issue. Now, the issue of working home, the issue of shift work, in order to have a level of continuity within the company, became a norm in some of the industries in order to keep the industry surviving economically. And what that speaks to is the understanding and the sharing of information, which is social dialogue speaks to, that was able to propel the trade union movement to understand the economic realities that were facing the employers, and therefore to recognize there was a need for the collaborative approach. There was a need for the consensus building if we were to survive, all right, this time that we are in. And we are in some particular times that we need to address. So I will want to conclude by saying that the issue of stimulating the business and economic support is something that we would have buy into as the National Trade Union Center. We would have been able to engage companies individually and collectively, all right, like the Answer Group, like Angostura, like Point Lisas, like the Port Authority, like West Indian Tobacco, in order to set up creative and a new temporary collective agreements, measures that were speaking to the reality that the companies was facing at that particular time. But more importantly, workers also understood that, and we had buy-in from the workers in the context of how we need to reshape and recalibrate how we do business if we are to survive this particular pandemic together. So that there are lessons, and I'm saying that the COVID-19 would have made the ILO and the ILO thinking so relevant, because what the ILO have been saying, and we know what is the role of the ILO, which I don't want to get into because I think everybody knows it. But what was important, that the issue of building strength and fortitude within the economy, within the companies, that is something the ILO has been talking about. The issue of productivity, the issue of social dialogue as a measure right, of taking this economy forward. The issue of tripartitism as a necessary form of building consensus at the initial stages and at the implementation stages. All these fundamentals came to the fore as a consequence, and we were able to understand and better appreciate the role of the trade union movement, one, the role of the government, two, and the role of the employers as a collective in order for us to survive this pandemic. And I want to say finally that the ILO, you all are doing a great job. The analysis that you all are doing, the fact that we are having this webinar, the guidelines that you all would have set out the trade union movement, and the continuous and consistent discussions on a sustainable level, which educates and opens our minds. I mean, it's so helpful, and I must compliment you all. The workers group too, I want to compliment you all because our sister did a wonderful presentation, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to get a copy of that presentation, because you know, we need to share that kind of information, not only with the trade union movement, but with our membership, which is the very existence and survival of the trade union movement. So I will stop here, and I will again express my profound thanks on behalf of the National Trade Union Center for the opportunity for articulating what we would have been able to accomplish using the social and tripartite dialogue measure that is ingrained in the ILO philosophy for social justice. It came a full circle, and it was appropriate, and the wisdom of social dialogue and tripartitism, I think, cannot be ignored by anybody globally again. And it was a pleasure to be able to use the ILO instruments in order to sit down and have the kinds of discussions at the government roadmap committee that I was on, and also in our interchange on the bipartite discussions that we had with employers collectively and individually. And I want to say thank you, ILO. And I will say again, if we didn't have an ILO, it would have been necessary to invent the ILO, given the realities that we have now found ourselves in. So thanks again.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Ansett. And to continue with our webinar, I would like to give the floor to our brother, Mr. Andrew Lewis from the CCL. Please, Mr. Lewis, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning, good evening to all colleagues and comrades. First of all, the CCL is very grateful for this engagement, and hereby thank the ILO Caribbean and ACTRAV ILO. We say welcome once again to Comrade Zulu. A special shout out to Marcelo and Miss Maria Helena Andre. Also welcome and special hello to all panelists and participants. First of all, I am dressed today in my red union t-shirt, that's local t-shirt, the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, because as we speak, we are engaged in an industrial struggle, an industrial battle, trying to save the job of one of our members who are retrenched at a state-owned enterprise in this period of COVID, when unemployment is so high. And our mantra in the Technical and Allied Workers Union and in the labor movement is that a good shepherd looks after one lost sheep. So whether it is one worker, 20 workers, or 50 workers, we have a duty and an obligation to protect that worker job. So we have been engaged in industrial action, and that's in the National Water and Sewage Authority. So we are wearing red union t-shirt, and if the matter is not resolved, we'll have no other alternative but to step up for industrial action, which can take any form of industrial action. A number of matters has been addressed have been addressed by my colleagues and comrades who spoke earlier. And therefore, I will just focus on a few samples of the Caribbean experience. And here I will look at Anguilla, for instance. As I said, a few samples throughout the region. In the case of Anguilla, and I know we have our comrade, Sister Susan Hodge, who is one of the participants on. And we find that in Anguilla, for instance, there is a struggle to have social dialogue taking place. The government has not been too receptive of this, and I know the ILO have been trying to assist in that direction. The last increases for the workers were in 2010, well, not an increase, they were a decrease of 25% in the workers' wages in 2010. So the requests by the government for a further reduction in the wages have not been accepted by the union. So there is no organized social dialogue in Anguilla. There was no discussion in an organized way in the stimulus package for the hotel workers. And you know, Anguilla is heavily dependent on tourism. So this is an example of throughout the region where we have not seen any organized social dialogue taking place. In Dominica, as I said, I'm just doing it with a sample. In Dominica, and I have Comrade Litang on, I know he's a participant. There's no organized or meaningful engagement in terms of social dialogue. So whereas there have been some activities undertaken by the government to help cushion the impact of the COVID-19, but it did not take into account what you call meaningful social dialogue with the labor movement. I will now go to St. Lucia. Since the COVID, the government in St. Lucia have sought to make an attempt to have some form of social dialogue. There has been an attempt to establish a tripartite dialogue. The unions have made a number of concessions. In some of these examples has been the extension of the collective agreement. So for instance, if a collective labor agreement expired in 2019 or 2020 or 2018, and there was no completion of the negotiated period, in some cases, these terms and conditions on the benefits were extended to 2021 in the first instance. There have been a reduced wage in some instances for, let us say, a 3-month period. We have had rotation layoff. There have been some cases of redundancy. These are some of the measures taken in St. Lucia. There has been under the COVID protocol, there have been restriction on operation or some functioning of businesses in terms of how far into the night that you can operate. All of these have been aimed at looking at health and safety, trying to reduce the negative impact of COVID in terms of the possibility of the spread. There has not been any redundancies in the public service. There has not been any cut in wages, although an attempt was made in terms of floating of those discussions. However, government have requested a deferral of a 1% increase that was due for this year, 2020. There has been rotation in the government services, not in relation to, there has been no reduction in wages, but there have been rotation in services so as to keep within the ambit of the physical distancing and the social protocol and COVID protocol as required. A number of workers have worked from at home. I will now go into Barbados, and let me say up front, in the CCL, we want to indicate that Barbados stands as a gold standard for what one calls social dialogue, and it is not only because of COVID-19, but Barbados, in terms of its social protocol, have been a leader in the region with social protocol. And in this period, especially of COVID-19, there have been a lot of engagement, positive engagement with the labor movement and the private sector. Here we speak of social dialogue. So in Barbados, the report from Barbados is that there have been weekly meetings, weekly engagement with the social partners. Hotel workers who were not sent home have been receiving subsidized salaries after the NIS, as the National Insurance Scheme, payment has run out. In Barbados, they have what we call locally and through the region as unemployment benefits, but this has come about because of a provision of paying into part of your contribution into the National Insurance Scheme. And this has been an initiative of the labor movement. I want to repeat, this has been an initiative of the involvement of the labor movement over the years in the discourse and discussion taking place within Barbados. As a matter of fact, only last week, a committee has been set up in Barbados to review wages. So even in this period of challenges, a committee has been set up to review wages with the intention and objective of trying to ensure that workers are not marginalized, that workers' salary can make and take care of some of the basic needs, and to ensure that the marginalized, that we call even within the informal sector, have a decent living standard. And labor is very much engaged in those discussions. Health and safety is of paramount importance in the Barbados experience. And I dare say, throughout the region, the labor movement is very much interested in the aspect of health and safety for workers. I will, after using Barbados, Anguilla, Dominica, St. Lucia, I will zero in on Grenada, and then as part of my wrap up, because my colleagues have spoken so eloquently of their experience, and I dare say that quite a number of the experiences as advanced by our colleague Comrade Anaset can be duplicated through the region. Barbados is an outlier. Barbados is an outlier in the sense of the level of social dialogue and engagement of the labor movement. Grenada, under our social dialogue approach, as Comrade Anaset indicated in Trinidad, and I can say it's the same thing in St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Dominica. It is mostly in times of crisis that our governments are pushed to engage in some form of genuine or open social dialogue. So in the case of Grenada, during our structural adjustment program, a program that we fell under the IMF, although it was homegrown, there was engagement with the social partners. And here I speak of the social partners as employers, private sector, the government, labor movement, and civil society between the period 2014, 2015, 2016, when we had to go into some belt tightening. And this was there was serious engagement at that time. Once we got through this period, the aspect of social dialogue sort of fell away. But now there is some engagement, not in any very structured way, but what one will say top down. In the private sector, I want to take hats off to the St. George's University. In the St. George's University, Although most of the students are off island, no worker has lost their job there. And no worker has had any reduction in pay. And despite the fact that the majority of workers were not at the job, every worker received their pay. The union, represented by the Technical and Allied Workers Union, have had to make certain concessions in relation to how we calculate overtime. How we calculate overtime and the hours of work, all bent on preserving the job. So the mantra of the labor movement in Grenada is the preservation of jobs. It is about looking after the interests of all of our workers. As I said, that in the private sector, certainly as you know, worker was sent home. The government did not send home any workers, and all workers have received their monthly salary. However, in our state-owned enterprises, NAWASA, which I opened up with, we have the case of where a worker was retrenched, and we are doing everything within the Technical Allied Workers Union to ensure that the worker's job is preserved. We continue to call for openness in dialoguing. And in keeping with the CCL, in terms of wrapping up the CCL approach, the way forward is the strengthening of social dialogue, the genuine engagement of the labor movement, which must not only take place for window dressing purposes, but meaningful engagement. We are calling for the preservation of jobs throughout the region, the preservation of businesses, because without businesses, there would not be any workers. And without workers, there'll be no labor movement. The aspect of safety and health must be of paramount importance. And hence the reason the Caribbean Congress of Labor had written to CARICOM addressing the issue of the reopening of our borders, because this second and third wave have had serious implications for our members as we open up our borders to the US, the UK, Europe, etc. And therefore, there is a need for that common policy to all the region to ensure that our workers' safety and health comes first. But we understand the issue of economics and health, and therefore we have to find that balance. Most countries are not able to continue with a stimulus package. And it is therefore important that we do everything to preserve, as I say, the jobs and income of our workers throughout the region. And here the ILO have a very important role to continue to play, as you have done in the past. And we need to work together in this trying period. So I will end here and be able to address other issues as they become relevant to the different questions and answers period. So thank you very much as we work together in the preservation of the health and safety, life of our people, and to ensure that our economy keeps growing, to ensure a decent standard of living. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I appreciate that you gave a broader view of the countries, and we have taken note of these particular initiatives. And on behalf of our team, I'd like to say that Barbados is an outstanding country that has this initiative on social dialogue. However, we reach out to them. However, they were unable to participate in this particular session. But I'm very pleased that you were able to share their initiative and vibrant initiative on social dialogue. Now, I'd like to move forward with our program. I'm sorry it's taken a bit longer than expected. We have some comments from our colleagues, and I'd like to read them to the panelists. I'm seeing from our sister Ida LeBlanc from the National Union of Domestic Employees, and she would like to highlight that she would like to suggest that the ILO to encourage or prepare a platform for dialogue between union and employer, as evidently they have seen through the years that non-participation of employers in the past where dialogue was concerned, and they'd like to see employers with the informal sector and employers of domestic workers coming together with the union and the government. So I'm assuming that this you would like to for ILO to facilitate the tripartite discussion, and that you will like to have more engagement from the private sector and employers of domestic worker, if I'm understanding correctly. And I'm also seeing another comment. Ms. LeBlanc says there can be no social dialogue with the exclusion of domestic workers. Indeed. If there isn't any further question or direct question, I would like to ask our TRAV director to give the final remarks, please.
Okay, Marcelo, thank you very much. I thought that there would be more questions, but I think that we have touched upon a number of very important and very relevant topics in the course of the presentations that Shirley, Michael, and Andre have made. And I think that on one hand, they do confirm what we are tempted to say is a good practice in the Caribbean, which is a very sustainable social dialogue model anchored on the practice of moving forward with the social partners. And I think that looking at what our colleagues have been reporting to us, this has not been left in the course of the potential answers to the pandemic. Now, answering to a pandemic where we don't have a roadmap or a road book that allows us to tell us what we have to do is somewhat different from what we're used to handle in the context of past crises. Here, we first of all have a health emergency, which is not yet solved. I mean, we continue to have the virus alive and kicking, so we are not safe in that regard, but we are already looking at the dramatic consequences it has in terms of the economy and in terms of our social policies, in terms of the livelihoods of people. And we have seen with the figures that we have given you at the outset that the impact in raising poverty is enormous. The other day, I was reading an article which was telling us that the impact on issues on women's equality will imply that probably we will go back around 20 years in relation to what we have been able to gain on the equal treatment agenda between women and men. So it's very worrying that we have not yet seen the end of this pandemic, and we have not yet seen the real consequences in real life, in the economy, and in the workers' lives. So moving forward and building forward better, as the DG says, and leaving no one behind, as we have said in our Centenary Declaration, really does require a strong, a persistent, a pragmatic approach on the part of the social partners. And here we can say two things. It takes two to tango, and it takes three to tango, although this is not right because it's only two to tango. But I think that it is important to make sure that the social partners, employers and workers organizations continue to use the instruments that they have within their reach, which is collective bargaining and the capacity to work together in order to draw up proposals to the governments in the context of the tripartite social dialogue that can help identify the best measures and the best way forward in relation to where we have to go from here. Having said that, which I think is something that the unions in the Caribbean are preaching and doing, and I'm very happy to hear that, it is also important that when we do that, we make sure that we try not to have some of the most disadvantaged groups be left behind. We've heard here about the domestic workers, we've heard about the migrant workers. I would add probably other workers in the platform economy, the self-employed, I mean, all those atypical, which are more typical than atypical forms of work relationship that have been hardly hit in the context of this pandemic because they were already the less protected even before the pandemic. So one thing is for trade union organizations to continue defending the rights of their members. And in doing that, utilizing all the existing materials and tools. I would say that here we're talking about a toolbox, which allows us to use different forms of dialogue, different levels of dialogue, but which allows us to use in an easier manner, I would say, to protect those that are traditionally trade union members. Now, we have a wealth of people out there that are not traditional trade union members, and they are the ones that have been more severely hit by this pandemic. And they are the ones that will probably need more support and assistance. And that's where the big challenge for trade unions comes in. How can trade union organizations in the Caribbean be the voice of all workers? Defend all workers, no matter their employment relationship. I'm not inventing anything. This is written in the Centenary Declaration of the ILO, that we need to make sure that the levels of protection are proportional and the same for everyone. And so I would say that out of this conversation, it is important to continue as you have done so far. And I think there are a number of examples that we could then bring out, and in the work that ACTRAF does, put them at the disposal in terms of the information knowledge that we can have with trade unions in other parts of the world. And that's, you will continue to do that with all the difficulties we are aware of, with the deficits that the states are going to have, with the difficulties that companies are going to have. But one thing we know for sure is that the virus, or with the vaccine coming in, the economies will go back on foot again. How long it will take, we don't know. But we need to look at those more disadvantaged groups with a new eye. And I would say that that's the challenge we all have in front of us, but also in the context of the dialogue with the employers and with the governments, because when we think that there is a potential wealth of workers out there that are not members of trade union, but potentially could be, we also know that in these new forms of organizing work, there is also a potential wealth for employers to organize some of these new forms of organizing work. So I think that there is a joint interest on employers and workers organizations in tapping the wealth of these people that are out there and are completely unprotected. So I think there's a lot of conversations that we can continue in this regard. We have last year I'm already lost. Yeah, last year we have issued a publication which is called Trade Unions in the Transition. And it's exactly looking at what type of new services trade unions need to put in place in order to represent everyone. And it's also making sure that trade unions continue to be relevant in our societies. They continue to contribute to the strengthening of democracies in our countries. They continue to protect workers' interests and rights, and that they don't want to be considered as another non-governmental organization, because they have a decision-making power and the capacity to influence the way that the labor market operates that is different from any other organization in the world. So I think this is an area where we could continue working, and this is an area where we could continue reinforcing the capacities of trade unions organizations in this. I was also very interested in listening to the appeal almost that was made regarding the need to look more at productivity related matters. And I have to say that this is part of the ILO's agenda. It should have been the topic of the DG's report had we had the 2020 ILC. It was exactly on productivity. Now, I'm not promising you that it will be the topic in 2021, because we know that in 2021, it will be about COVID and how you build forward better together. But in any case, if we can build on the experiences that exist in the Caribbean regarding the whole discussion around productivity from a trade union perspective, it will be also very important. I have to say that these discussions on productivity in other parts of the trade union movement in other regions are much more complex. And there is a resistance on the part of the trade union organizations to discuss productivity, because they think that this is not a topic of negotiation and that this is the topic which only interests employers' organizations. Nothing more wrong. So, I mean, again, how can we build on the experience that you have there in the Caribbean regarding the question of productivity, and how can we put it on the agenda of the trade union organizations, which in my view is also very, very important. Now, I don't think that the ILO would shy away from supporting workers and employers organizations that would like to promote platforms for participation in terms of developing the informal sector or the domestic workers agenda. two difficult topics from an employer perspective. Because if you talk to our colleagues of ACTEMP in the ILO, they will tell you, well, we don't deal with informal enterprises. We deal with them once they are formalized, which makes life very, very difficult, because we also know that in some countries, the agenda is not to formalize the informal. The agenda is to informalize the formal. So this is an area where if there are also good experiences and practices that can be promoted in your part of the world, please do that. We will support that, and we will want to use that in order to bring those good experiences to the other parts of the globe and to the rest of the trade union movement. So I think I was very encouraged by our conversation this afternoon. I take note that there is a big concern regarding some groups of workers. That's why I wanted to expand that group to others that have not been mentioned this afternoon. That there has been a great work done by trade union organizations in the answers to the COVID pandemic, that you have utilized the ILO's modest contribution to that we've tried to put at the disposal of the social partners and of governments, of course, in the context of the answers to COVID-19, that we don't have a roadmap. So we will need to continue building and sharing these experiences as we move along, but also that you are convinced, like I am convinced, that social dialogue, no matter at what level, it depends on how relevant it is at a specific moment in time, is the only way to move forward. We cannot pretend that we have democratic, strong, resilient countries and institutions if they are not based on a very, very strong social dialogue and social partnership, and if they are not based also on strong, autonomous and representative trade union organizations. And that's why I insist on the need to go and tap the capacity to mobilize and to organize in the new groups of workers, and also our engagement that will continue listening to you and to your concerns and working hand in hand with you. Marcelo now, Vera, whenever Vera will be back, and we will see how we can bring Marcelo more into the scene again as well. But I think that this is what I wanted to share with you this afternoon. Thanking you once again for a very good discussion. Thanking Dennis for having taken the time to be with us this afternoon. Melanie, Amanda, Marcelo, of course you, for having given us the opportunity to have this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Maria Elena. And just to give you a quick note before we finish, and following up on the discussions today, we'll be sending you a note with the highlights of this meeting and also the follow-up on the questions and the comments that we have received. And to our brother, Mr. Thomas Letang, we will be sending you the follow-up on your comments as well. I thank you, Maria Elena, for your input, and Mr. Denisulu as well. And our CRAV colleagues, thank you so much for supporting us and helping us here. To our panelists, thank you so much for making it and for sharing these vibrant and important initiatives. And to our colleagues in the communications department, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much. Be safe and keep well.
Be safe. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.